Today, if you head south on Ann Street in Hartford, Connecticut, heading towards the intersection with Asylum Street, you'll pass the newly renamed People's Bank Arena on your left and the intersection with Allen Street on your right. After crossing Asylum, the next intersection is with Pearl Street. If you'd been heading this way a century and a quarter ago, your experience would have been quite different. There were a lot of buildings on the left where the arena is today, and if you tried to continue south past Asylum Street, well, back then there was a building in the way. And if you turned to head west down Asylum Street, there were a lot of other buildings beyond it, only one of which survives today. So what were all these buildings, and what now forgotten history did they hold? Hi. This is History with me, Dan Sterner. Remember to hit subscribe as we explore the hidden history of the south side of Hartford's Asylum Street from Ann Street to Bushnell Park. Hartford is fortunate to have a surviving row of old building facades on the south side of Asylum Street between Haynes and Ann Street. West of that, however, there's two more buildings on the corner, and then a vast parking lot that stretches all the way to Ford Street across from Bushnell Park. This is a section of the bird's eye view of Hartford of 1877, and back then the entire block was filled with buildings, which included a church and a few five-story buildings. But, unlike the opposite or north side of Asylum, which had a number of substantial edifices, most of the buildings on the south side were older, more modest structures of just 2 stories or so. Let's go through these buildings and some of the fascinating bits of history associated with them, starting with the building that for years blocked the southward extension of Ann Street. It was built in 1838 as a brick double house by Charles Shepard. When he started building, the city had an opportunity to purchase the land so that the 2 sections of Ann Street, north and south of it, could be joined. Shepard demanded $1,100 for the property. Although George Brindley and William H. Imlay, who owned the land just to the south, offered to contribute $200 each, leaving $700 for the city to pay, the committee appointed by the city council thought that this was still way too much and only offered to pay half the sum. Shepard refused and proceeded to build the house, a building that would continue to obstruct the extension of Ann Street for the next 83 years. Petitions to extend the street failed in 1872 and again in 1882. As shown in this section from the 1909 Hartford Atlas, there was also development to the south of the old Shepard property, meaning that by the time the city got around to extending Ann Street, it would end up having to pay a lot more than would have been the case back in 1838. Around 1872, John M. Nay purchased the Shepard property. 8 years earlier, in 1864, after the partnership of the gold beaters James H. Ashmead and Edmund Hurlbut broke up, Hurlbut took on his young employee, John M. Nay, as his new partner. After Hurlbut's death 2 years later, Nay continued to lead the business until his own death in 1907. The origins of this Hartford business, incorporated as the John M. Nay Company in 1909, went all the way back to 1812, making it one of the oldest dental gold refining establishments in the country. And it's still in business today in Bloomfield, Connecticut as Derringer Nay Incorporated. After purchasing the Shepard House in the early 1870s, Nay built a workshop in the rear, where the home's garden and grape arbor had once been. He also added new wings on the east and west sides of the building. Various businesses and organizations occupied space in the Nay building over the years, including the city's Greek Club. In 1917, the Nay Company moved to a new building at the corner of Elm and West Streets, and in 1921, the city was finally able to acquire the building from its then owner, Joseph M. DeSopo. Ann Street was quickly extended through the former Shepard-Nay property. This photograph, taken before the removal of the Nay building, shows the 5-story building just to the west of it. Of course, with the extension of Ann Street, that structure became the corner building at Asylum and Ann. Erected in 1870 by C.H. Talcott for his wholesale drug business, the building's Asylum Street facade consisted of a 3-bay Italianate section with a bracketed cornice to the east, and then a longer 6-bay section with a second Empire-style mansard roof to the west. In 1925, Judge Francis A. Pilati acquired the building, which had been mostly vacant since the Talcott Company had liquidated a few years before. Pilati soon demolished the building and erected a new 5-story brick structure in its place. Completed in 1927, it was designed by architect Daniel A. Guerriero. The building is shown on the left in this photograph. It has a very different appearance today, however. In 1977, it was completely renovated to become the home of the Morse School of Business, which was moving from its earlier home, further north on Ann Street. The structure was given a new limestone facade intended to resemble that of the then-new Hartford Civic Center across the street. This building survives today, as does the 5-story building just south of it, which still looks much as it did when it was built around 1875. For 63 years, the building was home to Gionfriddo's restaurant, which first opened as the Chop House in 1933. Operated by Santo Gionfriddo Sr. and continued by his sons, the restaurant closed in 1996. Gionfriddo's was frequented by politicians and celebrities, as was another well-remembered restaurant located in the building next door, which was erected in 1916 to designs by architect Burton Sellew. A hotel was located here for many years. In 1947, the hotel and ground-floor restaurant reopened after a complete remodeling by Joseph S. Adajian and his wife Pearl, who operated the establishment with the help of their 5 children. Adajian had left Keterbeg, an Armenian village in the Antioch district of Ottoman-controlled Syria, in 1913. 2 years later, his future wife Pearl, who was from the same area, was among the Armenians evacuated after 53 days of resistance to Ottoman forces at Musa Dagh in 1915. Having started their first restaurant on Park Street in 1920, the couple opened an Old English-themed restaurant called The Round Table in 1937 near the corner of Asylum and Main Street. When 2 of their sons went into the service after America's entry into World War II, Joseph retired from the restaurant business, but once the war ended, he was ready to start another restaurant. Adajians, which opened in the hotel building at 297 Asylum Street in 1947, remained in business for almost 40 years, closing at the end of 1986. The lavishly decorated Armenian restaurant was notable for its 14 murals by artist Thurston Munson of Springfield. Depicting scenes from the Arabian Nights, the surviving murals were restored by Munson in 1993, but have been in storage for many years. I'll put a link in the description below to some websites that have more information about the murals. Sometime after the restaurant closed, the Adajian building was demolished. If you are enjoying this video, please hit the subscribe button and the join button. Before the hotel building where Adajians was located was built in 1916, there was a small frame house on this site that later had a grocery store on the ground floor, and next to that was the first Methodist Episcopal Church erected in 1860. The church, with its distinctive crenellated spire, stood for over 50 years. The Methodists moved out in 1905, and the building was acquired by the Hartford Electric Light Company, which had a power plant right behind the church on Pearl Street. In 1911, the entire front of the church was removed, and the building was converted into the Empire Theater, which existed from 1912 until 1927. I have a video with stories just about this theater that I'll link in the description below. Various stores occupied the front section of the building as well. After the theater closed, the space was turned briefly into an indoor miniature golf course. The building was torn down in 1931 for a parking lot. South of the theater, there was a long row of older 2- and 2.5-story buildings, with the much more substantial Hurlbut block built in 1870 and renamed the Carrollton in 1904, located at the end of the block at the corner of Ford Street. Despite the many larger buildings that were erected in the vicinity on both sides of Asylum Street, it's interesting that this particular stretch from the church to the Hurlbut block was never really built up, even after the rise of the Bond Hotel across the street, which was Hartford's most lavish hotel in the first half of the 20th century. One notable business that existed for many decades along this block was the meat and fish market started by Joel Palmer Newton, who was from Groton, Connecticut. In 1874, he purchased the already existing meat and vegetable market of F.W. Johnson and Company at 341 Asylum Street. In 1879, he expanded the business by opening a seafood market next door at 347 Asylum Street. J.P. Newton had married Mercy Burnett in 1867, and before coming to Hartford, he had operated a market in Uncasville with his wife's brother, James G. Burnett. In 1875, after starting his Hartford business, Newton summoned his brother-in-law, who shortly thereafter became one of Newton's partners in the business. After 2 years, Newton bought out his partners, and James Burnett had expected to leave Hartford, but then Newton persuaded him to stay on as the business's financial manager. Eventually, when Newton retired in 1893, his brother-in-law Burnett purchased the market with his partner Edwin A. Newton, creating the firm of Newton and Bernett. J.P. Newton retired to a farm he had purchased in Old Saybrook in 1889. He lived there until his death in 1918 in a Victorian house on the farm that still stands today at 220 Middlesex Turnpike in Old Saybrook. The house has been in an abandoned state for many years. It was used for exterior shots for the 1971 horror film Let's Scare Jessica to Death. In 1898, Newton and Burnett relocated their market a few doors down to 319 Asylum Street, just west of the church that became the Empire Theater. Edwin A. Newton was killed in 1912 after being hit by a truck while stepping from the sidewalk to board a trolley. James Burnett continued the business, which was incorporated as Newton and Burnett in 1913. James G. Burnett died in 1920, and 6 years later, the company erected a new building at 319 Asylum Street. This photograph of Asylum Street during one of the 1930s floods shows the new building, which was across the street from the Bond Hotel. By then, many of the buildings just to the west had already been demolished and replaced with parking. Newton and Burnett seems to have existed until about 1943. In 1954, parking lot operator Frank Zazzaro purchased the building at 319 Asylum Street and eventually replaced the building and the neighboring parking lot with a new parking garage. Towards the end of the block was an old 2.5-story building. This structure was torn down in 1941 to make way for a diner. This is a recent picture of the diner, which is now located in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. It had a long and complicated history. Erected by the Worcester Lunch Car Company, it was originally called Donwell's Diner, a portmanteau of the names of owners Donnellan and Wells. In 1949, it became Drake's Diner, but after owner Elliot Drake was arrested in 1953 for failing to pay his employees, it became Donovan's Diner. In the mid-1950s, it became the Hotel Diner, and in 1956, it was moved to Kensington, Connecticut, where it sat unused for many years until it was moved by new owners to Middletown, Connecticut. There, it operated as Squeak's Diner until 1997. After spending time in a field in Middletown, it was finally moved to the Lorraine Mills Textile Manufacturing Complex in Pawtucket, where, after 9 years, it reopened as the Miss Lorraine Diner in 2020. After the diner was removed from Hartford in 1956, a White Tower restaurant took its place on Asylum Street. The White Tower closed in 1981. The final 2 buildings on the block, a 3-story building and the neighboring 5-story Carrollton building at the corner of Ford Street, were acquired in 1953 by the neighboring Statler Hotel, just then under construction. They were soon demolished. The hotel, by then the Statler Hilton, opened in 1954. The hotel was demolished in 1990, by which time the neighboring White Tower was gone as well. And thus we come to the big parking lot which occupies the space where such businesses as Adajians, the Empire Theater, Newton and Bernett, and White Tower once existed. Do you have memories of this block of Asylum Street? Please share them in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.